I've been a detective for over 25 years, working cases that have taken me to the darkest corners of human nature. I thought I'd seen it all, the lies, the betrayals, the unthinkable violence. But there are some cases that cling to your soul like a damp, cold fog, cases you can never really forget. This one was one of those. It was the fall of 2019. The air had that crisp bite to it, a reminder that winter was just around the corner. I'd been with the department long enough to have earned my place as lead investigator on cases like this, but no amount of experience could have prepared me for what we were about to uncover. It started with a phone call on September 29th. A woman named Mary, in her mid-50s, had phoned in a panic. She was nearly incoherent, shouting something about a box and a head. I was in the middle of going over some old case files when the call came through. It wasn't unusual to get frantic calls, especially from the elderly, but something in Mary's voice gave me pause. There was real terror there. I threw on my coat and headed out to her place, a small house tucked away in the quiet suburbs of a northern Spanish town. When I arrived, Mary was standing outside on her front lawn, pale as a ghost. Her hands shook as she pointed toward the house. "It's in the kitchen," she stammered. "The box." I didn't know, I swear. Mary wasn't a suspect at this point, just a frightened woman who'd stumbled upon something horrifying. She led me inside, her face ashen. The smell hit me the moment I stepped through the door, a pungent, rotten stench that grew stronger as we approached the kitchen. My partner, Miguel, and I shared a look. We'd been in enough crime scenes to know that kind of smell. It was the smell of death. On the kitchen table was a large box, partially opened. The wrapping paper, pink and decorated with little bows, made it seem like an innocent gift, but the odor leaking from it told another story. With gloves on, I carefully peeled the rest of the paper away and lifted the lid. Inside was something I'll never forget. A human head, boiled and stripped of flesh, stared back at me. Its eyes were gone, the skin mostly peeled away, leaving only muscle and bone. For a second, the room seemed to close in on me, the horror of it pressing down like a weight. Miguel gagged beside me, turning away. We immediately taped off the house and called in the forensics team. I took Mary aside, trying to get the full story. She was visibly shaken, but after a cup of tea and some deep breaths, she managed to tell me everything. A few months earlier, in April, her neighbor, Carmen Marino, had come over, carrying that same box. Carmen was a 61-year-old woman, known around the neighborhood for her cooking. She was always bringing over food, especially to Mary. That day, Carmen had asked Mary for a favor. According to Mary, Carmen said she was having company over that evening and needed somewhere to store her sex toys. Sex toys? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Mary nodded, embarrassed. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Carmen was eccentric, you know. I thought it was strange, but she brought over this tray of fried rolls, delicious as always, and asked me to keep the box for a few days. I didn't think it'd be a big deal. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Carmen never came back for the box. Mary didn't want to seem nosy, so she didn't bring it up. But a few days before she called us, she'd started smelling something awful from the hallway closet, where the box had been stored. That's when she finally decided to open it. As soon as I heard Carmen's name, my gut told me this was bigger than just a neighborly misunderstanding. We'd been hearing rumors about her ex-boyfriend, a man named Javier Ruiz, who had been missing since April. Carmen had told people he'd left her and moved to another city. But nobody had heard from him since. We got a warrant to search Carmen's house, and when we arrived, she was eerily calm. She didn't deny the box had been hers, but she claimed she had no idea how a human head had ended up inside. "It's a misunderstanding," she said, her face devoid of emotion. "Someone's trying to frame me." But the more we searched, the more things didn't add up. Carmen had meticulously cleaned her home, but we found traces of blood in her kitchen, small spots that had been missed. When we questioned her further, the story unraveled quickly. Carmen had killed Javier in a fit of rage after an argument. She hadn't planned the murder, but after it happened, she panicked. She boiled his head to remove any identifying features and, knowing the police might come knocking, decided to get rid of it in the most twisted way possible, by tricking her neighbor into holding onto it, wrapped up like a gift. There was one more gruesome theory that surfaced during the investigation. Carmen was known for her cooking, particularly her meat dishes, fried rolls, empanadas, stews. Neighbors mentioned she'd been handing out more food than usual after Javier went missing. Though we never found Javier's body, some believed she had ground up his remains and used the meat in her cooking. We could never prove it, but the whispers lingered. Carmen was sentenced to 15 years in prison for the murder. She showed no remorse during the trial. As for Mary, she moved away not long after the case closed. I can't blame her. Knowing you unknowingly kept a severed head in your house for months would drive anyone to the edge. I've worked a lot of cases over the years, but this one, it still haunts me. Even now, I can't look at a tray of fried rolls without feeling a cold knot of dread in my stomach. It's a reminder of the darkness that can hide behind the most innocent of facades. But in this line of work, you learn to live with that darkness. You have to, or it'll consume you whole. I was one of the investigators on the case of Lela and Raymond Howard, a story that still haunts me to this day. I had seen my share of odd cases, but this one felt different, like it was wrapped in layers of mystery that we would never fully unravel. Even now, when I think about it, I'm left with more questions than answers. It started on June 28, 1997. Lela Howard, 87 years old, and her husband Raymond, 88, had decided to attend a festival in their small Texas town. Their son, a good man, was close with them and always checked in. When he couldn't reach them by phone that evening, he thought nothing of it at first, assuming they were just out late, enjoying themselves. But by nightfall, when they still hadn't returned, he drove to their home. Empty. No sign of his parents. That's when things started to feel wrong. The son did what any of us would do in that situation, he called the authorities, worried sick. Local police were dispatched immediately. A small town like theirs, people knew each other, and it didn't take long for word to spread that Lela and Raymond Howard were missing. It was strange, though, no one had seen them at the festival. Not a single person. After canvassing the area, it became clear, they hadn't even made it there in the first place. By then, it was getting late into the night, and I could feel this gnawing sense of urgency creeping in. We issued a missing persons report and started to get the media involved. The public needed to know. Their son had the same desperate energy, calling news stations and anyone who would listen, just hoping someone had seen his parents. Then, things took an even stranger turn. On July 2nd, 3 days after they vanished, a police officer, hundreds of miles away in Arkansas, spotted a car driving without its lights on. It was late, and as a routine measure, he ran the plates. Lela and Raymond Howard. But here's the kicker, the officer had no idea they were missing. He stopped them, had a brief conversation, and from what he described later, they seemed confused but harmless. They were old, after all, and people get disoriented, especially at that age. The officer let them go. By the time word reached him that the Howards had been missing for days, it was too late. They were gone again. That was the last confirmed sighting of them alive. We ramped up the search after that. Multiple states were now involved. We were combing through every lead, getting tips from people who thought they'd seen the couple or their car. But nothing ever panned out. It was as though they had vanished into thin air, and as the days stretched on, you could feel the sense of helplessness setting in among the team. Every missing person case gets under your skin, but this one? It was something else. I couldn't help but think of them, these two elderly people, wandering who knows where, scared, lost. Then, 10 days after they first went missing, July 12, it all came to a devastating end. Two young boys were out exploring near a creek about 250 miles from the Howards' home. They were just messing around, the way kids do when summer feels endless. But that day, something caught their attention, a smell. It was foul, like nothing they'd ever experienced before. They told their parents, who came out to investigate and immediately called the police. We responded right away. When we arrived at the creek, the smell was undeniable. As we traced it back, we found their car. It was a sickening sight. The vehicle had tumbled down the side of a cliff, hidden deep in the brush. The steep drop had kept it from being seen by passing cars or searchers in the area. Lela and Raymond were both still inside, deceased. I'll never forget the feeling that washed over me as we approached the wreck. There was a heaviness in the air, like the scene was drenched in sorrow. The Howards, a couple who had spent most of their lives together, had met such a tragic end. But there was something else that gnawed at me. At first glance, it seemed like a tragic accident. The car had veered off the road and gone straight over the cliff. But as investigators, we have a duty to dig deeper, to look beyond the obvious. And something didn't sit right with me. We found no skid marks on the road. That's crucial because it meant Lela, who had been driving, never hit the brakes. She didn't slow down. There was no last-second attempt to stop the car from going over. Why didn't she stop? Why didn't Raymond say something? They were both elderly, sure, but this didn't make sense. They weren't reckless people, and from what we gathered, Lela had always been a cautious driver. I couldn't shake the feeling that something else had happened, something that caused Lela to lose control, or maybe, just maybe, they were so lost and confused that they didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. The idea that they'd been driving around aimlessly for days, hundreds of miles from home, didn't add up. And why hadn't they made it to the festival in the first place? Some theories floated around, maybe Lela had a medical episode while driving, or maybe they both became disoriented together, feeding off each other's confusion. But those were just theories. We never got the full story. And that's what still haunts me. I keep thinking back to that police officer in Arkansas. He had seen them alive, confused, but alive. If only he had known they were missing. If only something had clicked sooner. Would we have been able to save them? It's a question I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. In the end, we had no definitive answers. Lela and Raymond were buried side by side, a couple who had lived a long life together and, in the most tragic way, had died together too. We closed the case, but I still can't help but feel that there was something more we missed. Some piece of the puzzle that we never found. Every time I pass a festival or see an elderly couple out enjoying the day, I think of them. Of how easily life can slip away, how mystery can surround the simplest of events, leaving us to wonder what really happened in those final moments. I remember this case like it was yesterday. It was a case that haunted everyone involved, especially me. Let me take you back to that fateful summer of 1986, on the 24th of June, when a young boy's dream ride with his father turned into a terrifying mystery. I was a private investigator back then, just getting my feet wet in some high-profile missing persons cases, but I could never have imagined how this one would unfold. It started in a small village in southeastern Spain. Juan Pedro Martínez Gómez, a bright-eyed 10-year-old boy, had just received the best report card of his life. His father, Andrés, was a long-haul trucker, the kind of man who was away for weeks at a time but always made sure to call home when he could. Andrés was strict but fair, a man with calloused hands and a heart that melted every time he saw his son smile. Now, Juan Pedro had always wanted to join his father on one of those cross-country trips. The lure of the open road, the thrill of sitting in that enormous red truck, and the chance to see places he'd only heard about in stories, it was the stuff of his dreams. But Andrés had always said no. Too dangerous, he claimed. A trucker's life wasn't for children, and he wouldn't put his son in harm's way. Until that day. Andres, proud of Juan's school success, decided to surprise him with something special. He cleared it with his wife, Carmen, and the plan was set. They'd take a trip up to the northern coast of Spain. It wasn't just a work trip for Andres anymore, it was going to be the family's vacation. They'd make memories along the way, visit the beaches once Andres had delivered his cargo, and enjoy a much-needed break. Juan was over the moon. I'll tell you something, when I spoke to their neighbors later, they all said the same thing. That family had been tight-knit, full of love. But it was more than that. People told me that Andres had been acting strange in the days leading up to the trip. He was quieter, more withdrawn, and looked worried about something. Nobody could put their finger on what it was, but it stuck with me. Days passed, and the family drove from town to town, making their way north. Everything seemed fine, or so it appeared from the little snippets of information we'd gather later. The truck stopped for gas, the family ate meals at small roadside diners, and it seemed like the perfect bonding trip for a father, mother, and son. And then came the Somosierra mountain pass. June 26. That stretch of road is notorious for its sharp turns and steep inclines, a treacherous route for any driver, especially someone hauling heavy cargo like Andres. According to witnesses, it was around midday when things started to go horribly wrong. One man, a local farmer driving his car along the pass, said he saw the truck speeding toward him, headlights flashing wildly, horn blaring. The big red truck barreled down the mountain pass, swerving erratically as if the driver had lost control. This man tried desperately to get out of the way, but there was no time. The truck collided with his car, sending him flying off the road. By the time he came to, his car was wrecked but he was still alive. Looking ahead, he saw the truck that had hit him, a massive heap of metal now lying on its side, wheels spinning in the air. Help arrived quickly. The paramedics and police scoured the scene. What they found was chilling. Inside the overturned truck were the lifeless bodies of Andres and Carmen. The cabin had been crushed on impact, and it didn't look like either of them had a chance to escape. But there was one glaring problem. Juan Pedro was nowhere to be found. I was called in to assist with the investigation a few days later. By that point, search teams had combed the area for miles in every direction, but the boy was simply gone. There wasn't a single trace of him, no footprints, no clothing, nothing. The initial assumption was that one must have been thrown from the truck during the crash and perhaps his body had been swept down one of the steep ravines nearby. But weeks passed, and nothing turned up. His disappearance became one of the biggest mysteries in Spain. Here's where things got even stranger. The cargo Andres was hauling that day. It wasn't just ordinary freight. At first, we were told it was liquid sulfuric acid, dangerous, sure, but nothing out of the ordinary for an industrial delivery. But when we took a closer look at the manifests and interviewed the company that hired him, some discrepancies started to appear. There were inconsistencies about the weight and amount of acid in the tank. Could some of it have been removed before the crash? And if so, why? More unsettling, some witnesses came forward with bizarre claims. One trucker who was traveling the same route said he saw a strange car tailing Andres' truck shortly before the crash, a black sedan that seemed to be following the Martinez family too closely for comfort. Another witness, a shopkeeper at a gas station, claimed he saw a boy matching Juan Pedro's description get into a similar car just a few hours before the crash. But that didn't make sense. Why would Juan leave his parents? In the weeks that followed, the case went cold. I kept digging, though. Something about it didn't sit right with me. The authorities concluded it was a tragic accident, with the boy likely swept away in the aftermath. But there was no body, and I wasn't ready to close the book just yet. It took me years, but eventually, I came across a former trucker who had been working the same route back in '86. He'd been living off the grid for years but agreed to talk. He told me that Andres had been in trouble with some unsavory figures, people connected to organized crime, who were using long-haul truckers to move more than just legitimate goods. Andres had tried to back out, but once you're in, it's hard to get out clean. My contact hinted that Juan Pedro might have been taken, not as part of a ransom plot, but as leverage. Andres' death might not have been an accident after all. The black sedan, the missing acid, the disappearance, it all started to form a darker picture in my mind. But the people responsible were too powerful, and by the time I got close to the truth, the trail had gone cold. As for Juan Pedro, I never found him. The hope that he might still be alive somewhere, far from the life he once knew, is what haunts me to this day. It's a case that, after all these years, I still revisit in my dreams, wondering if there was something I missed. The Somosierra mountain pass took the lives of 2 people that day, but the fate of one little boy remains Spain's most enduring mystery. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. Your time and engagement mean the world to me. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. And be sure to hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support keeps this channel going, and I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you.